Hi, I'm Jamie, and today we're going to talk about walk-ins. So, this is a very controversial and popular topic that I see a lot of comments and questions about. So, we're going to start with defining what I use as a definition for walk-ins. So, a walk-in, by my definition, and from what I understand by the most popular definition that's generally accepted in our circles, is that a walk-in is when two souls make an agreement to have an exchange for control of a physical meat suit. It's when one soul walks out and another soul walks in to finish an incarnation here on Earth in the same body. So most often these types of situations happen during a traumatic event, usually some sort of trauma, traffic accident. Traffic accidents are really very common. And to give you an example, a walk-in experience might explain to you that they know the exact point of transition because they were in the car driving on the highway. They see the headlights coming directly at them. They realize there's about to be a really bad crash. They brace for the impact, and then the next thing they know, they're sitting safely on the side of the road. Okay, and there's some confusion, obviously, about what just happened. Sometimes they will have memories of a whole different lifetime lived in a different body, in a different area, maybe even a different lifetime. But they still contain the memories of the original occupant. Okay, so they still can recall their 10th wedding anniversary, even though that soul in particular wasn't present for that event. So they still have access to all the memories. But once the walk-in switch occurs, they now have new personality, they have new tastes, new preferences, they have new experiences, new memories, and it's just like the term implies, one soul walked out and a new soul walked in. So it literally is a different person in the body. Okay, the body still looks the same, but the driver is not. Okay, we have changed out drivers of the bus. And that's a traditional walk-in situation. And how and why that happens is very complex, but it's usually an agreement that is made prior to incarnation with another soul. Maybe I only want to experience, a certain time frame of a human experience. And I really don't want to experience the older adult death and dying experience again. I have no value for that, maybe, perhaps, when I'm in the spirit realm. So when I'm setting up what I'm going to experience here on Earth, I may find another soul that wants to experience that or is willing to pick up that portion for me, and we make an agreement. Or perhaps I'm going into a very difficult situation. There are particular souls who come in to incarnate directly into bloodlines that are very dense and are very stuck. They have repeated, these bloodlines have repeated lifetime after lifetime in different combinations of roles, and they can't seem to get past the same patterns. They can't move the stuck energy, okay? And they're not advancing, they're not evolving in consciousness, they're not moving the energy of that bloodline forward. And in that case, a soul that specializes in this type of work may choose to incarnate into that bloodline to move the stuck energy, to break the patterns. And once that pattern is broken, they may have decided, I'm going to come in and blast a hole in the road, but once the road's open, I'm checking out, I got other things to do, and someone else can come in and do this. Or if I get in there and I decide it's hopeless and it's too hard and I don't want to do this and it's a hopeless cause and they just need to recycle around again and we'll try again next time, I'm gonna hit the panic button and check out and someone else can come in. Those types of situations totally do happen, okay? And that would be what I would consider a traditional walk-in. Now, let me explain to you some of the things that I personally do not consider to be a walk-in, okay? And these are things that I encounter a lot in my work. So if you're working with me and I use the term walk-in, I may redirect you to this video to help you define this. So I have heard some people define a walk-in as basically any situation where there is another soul involved in the physicality of a person. So when we're in the Akashic records, one of the very first things that I do if I'm checking your Akashic records is I check to make sure that there was only one soul in your body. Okay, because yes, it is possible to have a soul shifting situation where it may be different souls coming and going, and that's not necessarily a walk-in. Okay, that's a soul shifting situation, and that means that you're sharing an experience, firsthand experience with other souls. It's something you've chosen to do beforehand, okay? And it means generally that your consciousness is only going to be aware of your time that your consciousness is spending in the body, okay? Completely different situation. But you can also have things like attaching souls and earthbound spirits and people that you have made contracts with in past lives to experience things together, and those souls come in with you into this incarnation. They're just not completely physically incarnated. In those types of situations, I don't consider to be a walk-in. Okay, so if I'm giving you information during a session about a walk-in, that's not what I'm talking about. We'll call those by other terminology and use other terms for that. So just to clarify. But some people I've also heard, so I study psychology. I have a background in nursing and specifically abnormal psychology. And I have worked in psychiatric units and in mental health care in that field for quite some years. So I also have a personal history with family mental illness, very serious mental illness. So I'm very, very, very comfortable talking about the psychology of trauma. I am a survivor of abuse. I really don't like using that term, but it seems to be the term that explains to other people the situation more. I am not a survivor personally. That, to me, that implies victimization, so I don't use that term very often. But I have experienced a lot of abuse in my life. Earlier, not currently, everything's fine, I'm safe. But that is part of my past. I also have many past lives in similar situations. A lot of issues of power and control seems to be a common theme that plays out that I like to mess around with and see what happens. That's my personal choice as a soul. So, speaking from experience as someone who's experienced childhood trauma, I've heard some people say that they believe that they're a walk-in because they don't relate very well to their episodes of abuse, okay? Or they don't fully feel like they were present during a trauma. They feel like a walk-in came in and took that abuse for them, or that was the original occupant who experienced that abuse and now they're a different soul. They're the walk-in now because they can remember it, but it's like it happened to someone else, okay? And I actually had difficulty with this for a while because I actually had gone to someone and was discussing my past history with them, and we were discussing it, and this healer told me, that this was kind of my situation, and it didn't really settle very well with me. And I'm very, very alert to when things are not in alignment with my own truth. So I had to wrestle with this for a while, and I had to do some research, and I spoke with my mentor about it. And my mentor actually he actually is, a legitimate walk-in. He had the traffic accident event, and remembers the whole thing, and he was, brought in for a specific purpose. But I don't relate to my trauma except on a very distant type of distant memory now, looking back. And I don't want to upset anyone by invalidating trauma. That's not what I'm doing here. But when we experience abuse, especially as children, disassociation is a natural protective mechanism that we use to protect ourselves, okay? So disassociation during trauma is not the same thing as becoming a walk-in or having a walk-in experience, okay? But it will create some of the same experiential results, which is why I think some of the confusion happens. But if you can recall your traumatic event or your abuse, but you don't feel emotionally attached to it, or you don't feel like you were actually there, that's a completely normal response to trauma, okay? And that doesn't necessarily automatically mean that you're a walk-in. And by all means, my opinions and what we're talking about today are not the end-all be-all of things. There are lots of situations and unique situations that could exist that are outliers. I'm just talking about the general population, general trends here, okay? So if you cannot relate to your trauma, that doesn't mean that someone else experienced your trauma for you. It just means that you disassociated to protect yourself. And what happens during that time frame is generally when we experience something very intense and very difficult like that, a part of our soul will actually decide, I don't want to be here anymore, which is understandable. And that part of us fractures, it splinters off, and it goes back to be in the spirit realm with Source. And basically when that happens, it says your soul decides, it makes a conscious decision that this is too intense. This is not the experience that I wanted to have. I'm committed to it because this is my path that I've chosen, and I will see it to the end. But at this point, I think there is more value in me observing from the spirit realm and learning as a spectator, more percentage of me as a spectator. Because when we are, the majority of people, I've never met a person whose soul is completely intact while incarnated here on earth. We fracture. Okay, we always leave, always. Every incarnation, I don't care who you are, you're going to, unless maybe, you're ascended master. I've never met an ascended master face to face personally, so I can't really speak on that. But, that may be a different situation. But for the general human being, you're always going to leave a portion of yourself in the spirit realm. So you can read Destiny of Souls or Journey of Souls for a better understanding of this. And it's documented, clinical therapists, psychotherapists, hypnotherapists, Dolores Cannon, Edgar Cayce. You can compare all of these experiential records, and they pretty much all say the same thing. There is always a part of us, a part of your spirit, your soul, that remains in the spirit realm, that remains with Source, okay? And Destiny of Souls and Journey of Souls, those two books, explain why that is. I'm not going to get into that. But there's always a portion of you still in spirit, okay? But we also have a lot of portions of ourselves that have fractured off. Now, we fracture, a lot of us can choose to fracture in this physical incarnation that we're experiencing right now. And usually that happens with intense periods of trauma, really traumatic events in our lives. And when I say trauma, it doesn't always necessarily mean violent acts of crime. Okay, trauma is defined by you. I don't get to decide what trauma is for you. You get to decide what trauma is for you, okay? So that's important to differentiate. But when we experience these intense periods of trauma in our lives, a lot of times we will fracture off a piece of our spirit. And, if you like paranormal shows, one of my favorites is Dead Files. I enjoy watching Amy Allen work. And there was an episode where she was in a restaurant I don't, restaurant, pub, bar combination thing. And I don't remember the episode name. I wish I had looked it up prior to this, but I didn't know I was going to be using this example until now. But she, there was a murder that took place in the basement. And the whole premise behind this is there was a fella who was for hire. The guy had hired him to help him do some work in the basement. And there was a presence, an entity, an outside influence already in the basement that influenced this guy to, this hired fella to stir up his emotions and bring his emotional state to a boil, which he was already, pretty fragile. He was on the verge of homelessness, or already was homeless, and had a lot of things collapsing in his life, and was already very, kind of teetering on the edge anyways. And this presence that lives in the basement just kind of, stirred the pot enough to push over the tipping point. And the owner of the bar had made a sexual advance, allegedly, towards the man that he had hired. And the guy just used the hammer that was in his hand that he was working with and hit him in the head and killed him. And it wasn't planned. It wasn't premeditated. It was just literally a boiling over point, and this was the result. And I remember this episode specifically because when that event occurred, now this gentleman, the offender, the murderer with the hammer, the hired fellow, was actually still alive when she investigated this property, but she could pick up on the energy, okay? And her partner, the investigator, went and interviewed the guy that was still in prison to get his side of the story, right? But what they determined happened is, at the moment that traumatic event occurred, because yes, it's traumatic for the owner, the bar owner who died, but it was also traumatic for the person doing the killing. Okay, sometimes we don't always think about that, but it was a very traumatic event for him as well. And at that point, he fractured. His soul fractured, and a piece of him remained there. Okay, and the piece of him that remained there was recreating this experience. It was constantly putting out the vibration of this emotional state of that traumatic moment. And to me, that's an excellent example of when we fracture. Okay, that's why for some of us, when we return to the site of our trauma or our childhood home, is very overwhelming for us. It can also be a very healing experience sometimes, because when you enter that, you see it through fresh eyes. And, the people, the events, the places, the things in that environment don't look the same anymore, because you're coming with a new, fresh, different frame of reference where hopefully you have healed, at least to a certain extent. So you're looking at that with the eyes of a person who has healed from their trauma, rather than someone who is still actively in their trauma. Okay, so there's a difference there. But sometimes when we revisit those places, we can run into fractured parts of ourselves. And anytime that happens, we have the choice to reintegrate that part if we so choose. Now, a lot of this happens on an unconscious level, but when this happens, and it's not saying that you have to return to the site of your trauma to retrieve your fractured parts. It's not what I'm saying at all. Fractured parts of yourself can be carried within other people, in locations and energetic frequencies, in a sight, a smell, a taste, a touch. They can be attached anywhere. But the physical locality attachment is a good example that we're going to use. But when you're presented with retrieving a part of yourself that's fractured off in this incarnation, a lot of that process occurs, unconsciously. It's a subconscious level, but the result that we notice on our end consciously is usually a lot of emotional overwhelm. Okay, so just know, if you're feeling that may be what's happening, and for me personally, if I understand the process of what's going on, it's much easier for me to accept it and go with the flow and not fight it. Because a lot of times when things go on energetically with my own personal being and I don't understand it, I will fight it. It's like a natural response. It's fight or flight. I don't understand what's going on, and I don't actively recall choosing this, so I'm going to fight against it because I don't know if it's what's best for me or not. When in reality, I should trust my higher self, and I should relax and just go with the flow. I'm not there yet. I'm working on it, but I'm not there yet. It's part of the process. But we choose to leave fractured pieces of ourselves in different places. And sometimes we can leave those in past lives as well. If we die under especially traumatic circumstances, especially if you die in a state of confusion, we hear stories of souls that die, and they don't know they're dead. And that happened a lot, because there was a lot of confusion at the moment of their death. Or maybe they were doing something really important. They were trying to save the life of a loved one at the moment that they die, and they're caught in that emotional urgency, and they can't let it go. And they don't understand what's happened. And their soul fractured. And part of it stayed there. Part of their soul returns to source because they've moved on, but part of it stays there because it's so focused on finishing what it started, because the event was very important to them. They are saving the life of their loved one, and they're hyper focused on that at the moment of their death, and they have not chosen to move on. They're fractured. They stayed there. Okay, so you can think about, if you look at all of your past lives, and for many of us that are incarnated right now, because basically at this point, while time is collapsing on itself, if you're incarnated right now, you're pretty hardcore. Okay, this isn't an easy time to be incarnated on Earth right now. We have more freedoms and responsibilities and possibilities, but we also have a lot more limitations. Where it used to be, if you were born in this as a woman in the 16th century, you were born into a social caste system, and you knew what to expect. You knew what your role was. You knew how to define yourself. You knew what your possibilities were. And going outside of those wasn't really even a thought in your head that it was possible, because no one was doing it, because that wasn't where we were at in consciousness at that time. Okay, and yes, I understand time is not linear. We're using this as an example. But now we're rebelling. We're doing new things. We tossed the rule book. The instruction sheet is out in the garbage, and we're putting the IKEA together, on site. And we might create a bookshelf, we might create something else, we don't know. So we're kind of off the rails here. We're getting into the realm of more of what's possible, because time is collapsing on itself, and this period of consciousness that we're in is coming to a close, and we're shifting into something else, and that's okay. But the transition period is a little rough, I'm not gonna lie. It's pretty intense for most of us. So if you're incarnated here, most likely you've had a lot of lifetimes here on Earth, okay? And for some of you, you are karmically tied with the creation of humanity so deeply that you have so many past lives that have ended traumatically, okay? And you are very fractured. You were fractured before your soul even incarnated into this body in this lifetime, because you have been so invested in the consciousness progression of humanity up to this point. And you're still invested, but you just have less soul percentage to invest in this lifetime. Which, when you have a larger percentage of your soul elsewhere than you have in the physical incarnation, it's an unusual experience. I'm not gonna lie. It makes things difficult, and it makes things easier. Okay, so if that describes you, and that's what you're experiencing, it's okay. It doesn't mean that you're a walk-in. Okay, it just means that you have a lot of soul fragmentation, and you have a lot of soul loss. And to a certain extent, we can correct some of that, a lot of that, in your Akashic records. Okay. Now, the natural process of recollecting your soul fragments would be to run into a fragment of yourself that's stored in another person who's agreed to carry that in this incarnation and would be reflected back to you in an experience. Okay. So you would see the trauma of that soul fragment that's attached to that soul fragment reflected back to you in experience through an interaction with someone else directly, meaning you recreate that experience here. That gives you an opportunity to reintegrate that soul fragment, or you experience it as an observer by watching someone else go through the same thing. And they've chosen to hold that fragment of you and to experience that for your benefit, to give you an opportunity to reintegrate that fragment. And that is a very sacred contract that occurs. And that's very sacred work to agree to do for each other. So you can choose to reintegrate it. And like I said, it's not like you have to stop and think about it. It's a process that's just going to happen. It's a natural process. It's just part of how your soul is designed to operate. It knows what to do. You don't have to interfere. But there are a lot of things that go on at an energetic level, at a soul level, that we're not always consciously aware of. And this is one of those things. But we can also go into the Akashic records and locate and call back those portions of your soul that have fragmented off. And I have a special, process that we use through soul realignment, that helps facilitate that for you. But we can go through life collecting our soul fragments to try and gain more of ourselves in this incarnation. But we can also choose to leave them there. But what happens when you have less of yourself in your body than there is elsewhere? For one, you're going to feel really low on vital force energy because there's not a whole lot of you here. The energy is being directed elsewhere. Okay, it's very diffuse. It's like being scattered. And there's going to be this very deep longing that you experience to be reunited with the parts of you that are missing. And that's very painful, and it can be very, very distressing. Okay, so if you have a feeling of, I don't want to be here, you're not alone. A lot of people, especially people incarnated and alive right now, are experiencing the exact same thing of, I don't want to be here. I'm not meant to be here. I'm meant to be somewhere else. Because there's a greater percentage of you, there's a greater portion of you elsewhere that's calling to you for reunification. Okay? And just for me, understanding that process of what's going on helped me tremendously. Okay? Because when you constantly have a thought pattern of, I don't want to be here, and you go through all the process of shadow work and integration and therapy and medication and all of the self-help things and the professional medical advice and things that they say to do, and it's persistent and it's prevalent in your life, the thought that I don't want to be here, it can be really distressing, and it can be very discouraging. And it creates a pattern of deeper depression, because at its root, if you don't understand it, it's very easy to think that there's something wrong with you. Why am I this way? And we can start to believe that we deserve to be this way, and we can look for experiences in our life that back up that belief that I deserve to feel this way, and I deserve to feel this badly, and I don't deserve to be here. And when we start to buy into that thought pattern, we start creating things, we start manifesting experiences in our reality that back that up, because you are the creator of your experience, and your will be done. What you say, what you think, what you believe will manifest in your reality. So if you believe that you don't deserve to be here, you will attract experiences into your life to reinforce that. And I've never had an experience in my life that reinforced a belief that I don't deserve to be here that was pleasant. And we get caught in this loop of recreating things to back up the BS beliefs that we're carrying around, to justify a concept, a natural cause and effect concept that we don't understand. When just understanding what's going on clears all of that away. Okay, and that's what I'm hoping to do for you through this explanation. Okay, is if you have a deep-seated belief or thought process that you can't seem to get rid of, that I don't want to be here, it may just be that you have a greater percentage of soul loss than other people that you may be looking at that don't seem to have a problem with wanting to be here. And that's okay. It's a cause and effect. And there are things that we can do. There are steps that we can take to correct that. We can call some of those fragments back into your physical being. And that helps lessen that longing to be somewhere else, to be reunited with your soul. Okay? And that is something that I don't think the medical community addresses enough. You know, if you go to the doctor for depression, one of the first things they're going to do is prescribe you medication. And speaking from personal experience, the medication is a rough road. It's not always effective. And when it is a medical success as deemed by your medical professional team, it basically just means that you are either numb to your life, or you have got your head just barely above the depression waters enough to be functional, but not to be happy. Now, I'm talking about depression stemming directly from soul loss and the belief that you don't want to be here. I'm not talking about chemical imbalance depression. I'm not talking about hormonal depression. We're not talking about those cases today, okay? Just specifically this example. So if you're experiencing this in your life, just know that you're not alone. And I'm hoping that by understanding the process, what it is and what it isn't, will help you let go of the belief that there's something wrong with you, because there's not. Okay? You're not a walk-in. You're not a new soul. Okay? I really got hung up on this because I just had this feeling, well, if I'm a walk-in and I had another soul that shielded me from the trauma during my childhood, and so that would have been the original occupant, and then that would make me the walk-in, right? Well, my work is done. I blasted open the roads. It's clear. I broke the patterns. I want to go home. I don't want to be here. I did the work. This isn't fair. You know, and I spent a lot of months wrestling with that personal pity party that was just overwhelming for me because I didn't understand the process. Okay, I didn't know that I needed to recall my fragments. Even though I've done Akashic work for 3 years now, 4 years. I've been doing soul realignment. I've been doing soul loss retrieval for other people. I had complete blinders on, and it didn't occur to me that I needed to do that for myself. Okay, I needed an outside point, an outside perspective, an outside viewpoint to show me. Okay, and my mentor did that for me. You know, sometimes we need others' help and, you know, to see things clearly. But it didn't mean that I was a walk-in, because I'm not. Okay, and most likely you're probably not either. And getting caught up in the belief that you're a walk-in is somehow very comforting, because that means all those things in my past were somebody else. My history, all that, all the mistakes I made, all the abuse, all of the icky that's stored behind the family secret closet, all of that is someone else. I'm a different soul. It's the same body, you know, so I'll have to do some cleanup, you know, I'll have to do some work on the meat suit, on the avatar, but it's a different soul, so I don't need to be responsible for all that stuff. And that's a lie that we can buy into. And what happens when we do that is we're abdicating personal responsibility and we're giving our power away. If you've watched any of my other videos, you know that when you give your power away, you're handing the keys to your bus to someone else to drive. And if someone else is driving, you don't get a say in where you're going. So if you want to manifest anything new in your life, or you want to create anything new in your life, or you want to stop the creation of things in your life that you don't want, you're powerless to do so because you gave the keys to someone or something else. But the good news is you can choose to take the keys back anytime you want. But it also consciously involves accepting the responsibility that goes along with it, which you still have the responsibility all along. You're just pretending you gave it away. So when you accept responsibility for your life, your past, your history, the good news is that you can then choose to not use it to define who you are now. That's a possibility. Your past doesn't have to define you. And in the world that we live in today, with collapsing timelines, falling in all around us, and things changing constantly, and all of the chaotic energy that we're dealing with in the collective consciousness, it's probably best if you don't use your past to define yourself. If you are the conscious creator of your life and your experience here on Earth, you get to decide. So if you need some help, message me. We'll talk. But I made this video today, for one, so that I don't have to explain this concept over and over to my clients. I can just point you to the video and explain it once for everyone. And two, I really, it's a personal mission of mine. I went through the experience that I have, the trauma, the complete loss of personal power, in order to slingshot myself to the complete opposite end of the spectrum to regain my personal power and to stand fully in my personal power. And it pains me when I see someone else still down here in this spectrum, struggling and hurting and not understanding and not knowing where the door is. Okay, if I can shine a light and help you find the door and help empower you to find your way out and back to empowerment, it's a good day. So that's what the purpose of this video is, primarily. It's for me to help you find the door out if you are trapping yourself under the term of being a walk-in and giving away your personal power under that term. So, all that said, disclaimer, yes, I understand there are lots of other examples. Yes, I understand that there are lots of valid walk-in experiences. That's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about a pattern that I see in the collective consciousness. We're talking about a pattern that's being taught actively in our communities right now. So if you are using an identification as an empath, as a narcissist magnet from a narcissist, if you are playing out any of those dynamics, personal power dynamics, that's what those are all about. And you stumble upon the concept of a walk-in and you think this is the solution to all your problems, that's me. That's my way out. It's probably not. And convincing yourself that you're a walk-in to abdicate personal responsibility for your past just puts you deeper into the victimization loop. So I would encourage you to not do that. Be brave. Break the pattern. And if you need help, message me. Thanks for hanging out with me. I enjoyed it.